person in the room who knew Jack the best. Will you show a little love for Jack's granddaughter, Tracy Kirby?
Yeah.
Show you that being short runs in the Kirby family. Thank you for being here, Tracy. Since we last met, the major change in the Kirby, well, you know, Jack was a man who was rarely ever surprised by anything related to comics. He was surprised frequently by the business ethics, but the content didn't surprise him. Somebody asked me last year, would Jack have been surprised that there was this huge multi-million-dollar movie of the Avengers? No. Would Jack have been surprised that there was this huge multi-million-dollar movie of Thor? No. The other day somebody asked me, would Jack have been surprised that there was this huge multi-million-dollar movie of Ant-Man? Maybe. I don't know for sure. I think, you know, Ant-Man was the character that Jack cared about the least of anything he ever worked on. In fact, he got very angry one time. Well, not very angry. Maybe on a scale of it at about 5, when somebody wrote an article and said, obviously because Jack is short, the character he must have identified with most of the comics was Ant-Man. And Jack said, you know, that's stupid. And he thought Ant-Man was a stupid comic because nobody fantasizes about being an ant. He fantasizes about smashing down walls and being able to fly. And, you know, nobody suddenly says, I really want to be chased by a caterpillar. But, you know, with Jack, it was hard to sometimes second guess where that brain of his was going. Maybe he would have gone, of course Ant-Man is a great movie. I don't know that for a fact. Anyway, but one of the other things that has changed is that a lawsuit was settled. You may have heard about this. And we're not going to talk much about it at all, really. I'm going to say 2 things about it. One was that I'm real happy. Jack and Roz would have been happy. The Kirby family is happy. Everybody around the Kirby family is very happy. Now, you can make an argument of too little, too late. Jack and Roz should have been here to see it. Yeah, okay, fine, given. But given the reality of what was possible, I'm very happy. Now, the second thing is a personal matter. I met Jack in June of 1969. July of 1969, excuse me. Almost exactly this time of July, in fact. And he told me at that time, and my friend, as he told anyone who visited him then, what he felt he had contributed to the Marvel Universe, what he did, how he felt he was being undercredited and not treated very well. And in subsequent visits, as I got to know him better, I learned more and more about that. And I began to realize more and more. And then, of course, I started meeting people like Don Heck and Steve Ditko and Joe Sinnott and Dick Ayers and Stan Lee and, you know, Saul Brodsky, other people who were around all that. And I began to realize that Jack's version of the events was essentially correct. One could occasionally quibble with a mistake of memory. Jack occasionally would say Captain Marvel when he meant Captain America. Or he'd sometimes confuse Dick Ayers with Joe Sinnott when he was talking about something. The kind of mistakes everybody makes. And he had some different terminology sometimes for words like creator or writing. But I found that Jack was very honest, a very honest man. I never, in my entire association with him, felt he was intentionally lying to me or to anyone. I never heard Jack lie. I heard get things wrong about, you know, which comic Iron Man was there, something like that. But I never felt that he lied. And over the years, my feeling that he was undercredited, that he was being financially wronged, grew and grew, and I got madder and madder. And I reached a point in my life when I could not go see the Marvel movies. It just annoyed me too much. I got stuck going to see the first X-Men movie that came out. And I didn't like it. And I just didn't like it as a movie, first of all. I have a low tolerance for CGI. When anything can happen, you know, I grew up in an era when if somebody leaped off a building, you knew, I mean, it wasn't Sean Connery leaping, it was his stuntman, but you knew someone had actually done that. Now I don't believe anything on the screen. But I didn't like the movie. I thought it was very loud. And I would have walked out on it except that I was sitting next to Stan Lee at the screening. And at the end of the movie, I was working for Stan Lee Media at the time, a company which has lived on forever in lawsuits. And the entire staff was there. We were basically paid to be there that day. And I was actually paid very well to see that movie. And they cheered when Stan's cameo came on. And I don't begrudge Stan some moments and some. I think Stan deserves a lot of credit for things he did. But at the end of the movie, everybody got up and walked out. And I sat there waiting for the credits. I was waiting for Jack's name. And I'm sitting in this movie at the Cineplex. This theater at the Cineplex. They rented it for the afternoon. And I'm sitting there, and ushers are sweeping up popcorn boxes around me. And I'm the only person in the theater who's watching the credits. And I'm determined I'm going to stay there until I see Jack's name, even if I have to sit through a run of Chicken Run, which was playing in the theater normally. And finally, Jack got the smallest, most insignificant credit. His credit, he and Stan were credited at the very end, right after the people who had done, had supplied with donuts or something like that. And I got so mad about that. I get mad about once every 5 years. I got very mad about that. And I have not to this day seen any more of the Marvel movies. And I just want this, as a personal note, I just want to tell you that a great weight has been lifted off me by this, and I'm very happy for me, apart from all of the happiness I have for the Kirbys and the people who love them and such. Anyway. Let me introduce the dais to you here. First of all, I'm going to start at the far end. Part of the reason that weight was lifted off me is that Jack has had, finally, in his life, a couple of good lawyers here and there. He did not, at some points, have those. And one of them, for a time, was this gentleman who, full disclosure, was also my attorney. This is Mr. Paul S. Levine. Jack was an enormous fan of entrepreneurialism among artists. That's not exactly the word, but it will suffice for this kind of what I mean. He liked the idea that artists took responsibility for their work and that they made the majority of the profits on it and such. And one of the other things that was interesting about Jack is he never begrudged the new kids who had more advantages than him. Obviously, a guy who got into comics much later than Jack had a better deal, got better contracts, got percentages and credits and much better treatment. He never resented the fact that those people got something he hadn't. And when a bunch of creators started getting superstar status and the attendant remuneration, Jack was an absolute cheerleader. There was not a single scintilla of resentment in him. And he was a big fan of these people, especially a few of them who turned around and helped the Kirby family out a lot. And one of those people who helped the Kirby family a lot and made them very happy was Mr. Rob Liefeld. Rob is going to have to leave us because he's so popular, he's got another panel double parked outside. But I'm going to get to him in a minute. I'm going to ask him first and talk about his relationship with Jack and his feelings with him. I'm going to skip Mark for a second here. Another entrepreneurial person, because I'm talking about entrepreneurs. I'm talking about people who were artists and writers, but who also took command of publishing and controlling the work, not just for financial reasons, but for creative reasons.
And I was just a minion. God with one eye. Sorry. Okay.
I've heard people say less silly things on panels if you just stare at them. Thank you, Mark. Anyway, another guy that Jack knew and respected and thought was a hell of a good guy, Mr. J. David Spurlock, ladies and gentlemen. Briefly here, I believe there are some people in the audience who have Kirby-related announcements to make. Let me first of all introduce to you the publisher of the Jack Kirby Collector, Mr. John Morrow. Jack Kirby Museum, what's the full title? Museum and Research Center?
That's right.
That's Rand Hoppy over there, ladies and gentlemen. How many board of directors is in this room at the moment?
All of them.
Okay, Tom Kraft is over there, folks. Is David Schwartz here?
He's not.
Can you lie to me? Who else is here from the board? Who else is here from the board? Right here.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, and John. Anyway, who has here in this room has a Kirby-related announcement to make?
Harry Gettler does.
Okay, this is Charles Hatfield, folks.
My school, Cal State Northridge in Los Angeles, is presenting this exhibition called Comic Book Apocalypse, The Graphic World of Jack Kirby. That's a 7-week exhibition that opens when the fall semester opens. The first Monday that I go in to teach my classes will be Monday, August 24th, when that show starts. This is about 100 pieces of work by Jack in a 3,000 square foot gallery. It's the first comic show that my university has ever done. This will be mostly Jack's work from the 1960s and from the 70s, but some work from before and from after that period, emphasizing the cosmic, the futuristic, the primitive, the Kirby tech, science fiction, myth fantasy, superheroes, FF, Thor, Commandy, The Fourth World, OMAC, 2001, The Eternals. We have, thanks to the generosity of quite a few Kirby collectors, both in California and elsewhere, we've got a really nice sample of Jack's work from that period. It's not something we could have done without the early and crucial help of Mark and without the help of the Jack Kirby Museum and Research Center. So I'm very grateful to them. This is going to be one of the largest shows of Jack's work that has been done, possibly the largest in the U.S., and we're really looking forward to it. So if you've received this flyer or mailer, feel free to, you can, outside the room afterwards, I'll be glad to answer questions about that. We have a grand opening reception on Saturday, August 29th, open to the public. Just a chance to come in and be surrounded by this transporting, mesmerizing, sublime artwork by Jack. We have a panel discussion later in September. We have a number of events at my school tied to this. So we are very much looking forward to it. We plan to have 2 complete stories by Jack, a lot of other pages, a lot of other work by him, a handful of those signature collages that he did both for publication and for pleasure, that were such a part of his creative life, and 1 or 2 things that never saw publication during his lifetime. So it's going to be, a very exciting event. It's the first, university event that properly dedicated to Jack. So I hope that you can come if you're in Southern California, or if you just get there. It'll be a Kirby phantasmagoria for 7 weeks, from August 24th through October 10th. So I hope to see you there. Thank you. When we're done, I'll be right outside if you want to ask me any questions about that.
I think we're going to be exiting on that side. So.
Okay, I'll be right on that side. Mark, thank you.
Barry, you want to say something? This is Barry Geller, folks.
Thank you, Mark. You've done incredible stuff all these years. It really makes all the difference to always be here. I worked with Jack Kirby designing and creating the Lord of Light drawings when I was producing that film and the theme park science fiction land. I wasn't part of the comics business, I'm not part of the comics business, but I just had that unbelievable experience creating with Jack for about a year. And these are the drawings that were originally, when I had on my staff a man named John Chambers. It turned out he was like the guy that did Planet of the Apes, and it turned out he worked for the CIA. And when we ran into these problems in Colorado, anyone can hear me, John took the screenplay and Jack's drawings that we created together and gave them to the original Argo-ish And that's actually what made it all happen. I think a few years ago I said a few words, but
Barry, how can people now get copies of these drawings in color?
I'm just getting to that right now.
I'm leading into the plug for you.
Anyway, but there's some new news about that, because one of these drawings was interviewed about 8 months ago by the Sons of the Revolutionaries in France, and I asked them what was the most important drawing to them, because they wanted to know the true story. And they held up one of these things called the Terminal of the Gods, and they said, well, I said, well, why is this so important? And he said, because it signified to us the departure of the Shah and the return of our gods. And for us, that means Jack Kirby's work and the visions that we were all doing together transcended everything possible and affected their culture and the world. And so I just wanted to add that to, because no one knows that. About a year and a half ago, I started working with Tom Kraft, digitally reconstructing the original negatives, and we are finally getting museum quality level prints out. And about a year ago, and this is just so fantastic, the synchronicity is I made a deal with Heavy Metal Productions, and they are putting together runs, color runs, of all these drawings. You can see them upstairs. I think it's 1529, and they're getting out day glow colors and then metallic colors, and they're bringing in artists. Like, for example, here's an announcement. Kevin Eastman has also decided that he would be proud to do one of these reimaginings of these drawings. The producer, Jeff Krelitz, said to me, he's thinking about various names, and he thought about Kevin Eastman. I said, well, that would be completely fantastic, because Kevin, when I was working with Jack, was always, Jack was reading letters from Kevin. And so it turns out that Jack had completely mentored Kevin Eastman, the creator of the Turtles. And so it's all come around again. And I think we're going to have a real Jack Kirby year, because these incredible drawings are going to be sent out and all over the world.
And you're down at the Heavy Metal booth?
Yes.
Which is what? Do you have the booth number?
1529.
1529. You go down there.
1525.
You go down there and see them and talk to Barry. He'll be there a lot, and purchase a couple of these lovely prints.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Anyone else have a Kirby announcement? All right.
I do.
Oh,
I do.
Oh, Paul?
Fighting American.
What about Fighting America?
What? Titan is going to be doing a new series of comic books based on Fighting American. I just made the deal on behalf of Jack with the publisher out of England.
Very good. Thank you. By the way, this has nothing to do with Jack, but I want to mention that one of the best books on a creative talent that is out there. There's a wonderful book about Harvey Kurtzman. It was written by this gentleman right here, Bill Shelley. Speaking of books about creative people, I am actually going to finish the book, my book on Jack. I couldn't until the lawsuit was settled, and now I'm free to finish it. I don't have an exact timetable, but I am working very actively towards the end of it, and I hope by this panel next year I'll be able to give you an on-sale date. Anyway. Also, the people at IDW asked me to mention, and I don't know if they've announced it yet, they are doing Commandy Volume 2 of the big, giant books, and they're going to do a whole run of issues all inked by Mike Royer. So, that will be coming out. Anything else before we get to the interviews? All right, Rob, let's talk to you for a second here, because you have to go.
I'm here till 11 o'clock. When it said it went to 11:15, so. Okay. I just want to say it is such a tremendous honor. When you asked me to come to this, I was so thrilled. As you know, my love for Jack is runs so deep. It's eternal. It's forever. And I love that you guys gather every year and remember and talk about him. But go ahead.
No.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
What was your favorite Kirby stuff when you were growing up? What was your favorite Kirby?
It shifted on the week. I am 47 years old. I started collecting comics at 5 years old because my parents gave me Richie Rich and Casper comics. But my dad took me to the barber, and he had Marvel comics. And the barber liked me and saw the magic that, you know, these comics had on me, and he allowed me to swap my Richie Rich and my Casper, and I felt like I am getting one over on this guy. But I got Commanding and the New Gods, and I'm going to tell you, you know, a comic will hit you and stay with you your whole life, and you can't explain why, but the one-man Army Corps that is OMAC hit me at a young age, and I have been trying to recreate OMAC my entire life. You know, but no, honestly, Mark, there is nothing he didn't do that I do not get genuinely thrilled over. But around that time, also 75, you had the Eternals. He was coming back. His Captain America run. But my thing with Jack is, he was, I mean, there's nothing he didn't do well. He was the best storyteller, the best illustrator, and by far the best costume designer that this business, or any business, has ever seen, ever. And when you see like any influence in my work, the first thing I would tell you is Jack and his headdresses. That dude put the best headdresses on people ever, starting with Galactus and continuing through Orion and Light Ray. So, look, I get Jack, but I didn't mean that. I get very excited over Jack, as you can tell.
Tell us about meeting Jack for the first time.
The first time I met Jack was at a convention in Los Angeles, and I was on a panel. I had just started my career. I was about 2 years into comics, and I was on a convention with on a panel with Jack and Mike Mignola, and we were just in awe of Jack. But there was one thing that Jack said that, as an artist, just encouraged me that day on the panel, and it doesn't hold true today because time has changed. But in 1989, he was 100% on the mark, and someone said, what advantages do you think comic book artists have? And he said, you know, everything we can create, we can do with a piece of paper and a pencil. We have unlimited budgets. I'm a terrible Jack. But when I say it, I have to kind of remember how he was, his cadence. And he goes, Hollywood can't keep up with us. If I want to destroy an entire planet, I can do it on a double-page spread, and it costs me my pencil and my eraser and my paper. And I was like, yeah! And now it's like Mark said, now, you know, the CGI guys can go, oh yeah? Mr. Kirby, watch this. And put some pixels, but they got that from Jack. They got the idea from Jack to do it in the first place. So it all goes back to Jack. The first time I met him, we were walking the halls of San Diego in 1991. So it was a year before Image. And my peers and I had experienced some great success at Marvel. And I was walking through the hall, and Roz said, hey, could you come here for a second? And I immediately recognized her as Roz Kirby, and Jack in the dapper suit, you know, I'm doing him a disservice in my hoodie. He comes to Comic-Con rocking a suit. He walks towards me slowly, and he said, I just wanted to tell you how inspired I am by you and your peers and everything you're doing. And if you don't think that I stopped him, I quit. I'm like, God just gave me a compliment. There is something wrong with this. It's like Mark said, he was as genuine and kind and nice. And I'll tell you, because my kids hear me talk about Jack Kirby all the time, the highlight of my career, it is the absolute highlight, was when Roz and Jack invited us to their house. And I had a studio at the time, and about 6 of us, including Eric Stevenson, who is the current publisher of Image Comics, and he will tell you this is one of our magic moments. And I saw Mike Thibodeau in the audience here. He was there that afternoon. We piled in the car and we drove to, is it Thousand Oaks?
It was, yeah.
And we went to Jack's house about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I remember sitting around the table at midnight going, do we have to go? Because he doesn't seem like he's going to sleep. He told us the best stories from World War II through the comics industry, and I mean, my mind was so blown. We were touching the hem of God. To me, that was the most important period and day that I had in the comics industry, and everybody in my studio who worked with me that day will tell you the same. And I just want to tell you, Like, again, I was just, you understand, Jack Kirby influenced everything about me and my peers' work. And so we're walking, okay, I had never seen all these biblical drawings he had done. Okay, so this was a revelation to me in 1992. And we walked by the first wall, he's showing us the house. And there's a giant picture of a man with a beard and the flowing hair and the cosmic lines dots that Jack did. And to me, I mean, is this Highfather? Is this Odin? You know. And so we're sitting there, and Jack's standing next to the giant frame, and I said, "So who's this?" "Well, that's God." And I said, like God. This is my drawing. And I was like, dude! And then I went, the next drawing is this like Jack Kirby machine, like one of his like Galactus technology thing that could only come out of his imagination. And there's like a guy like hitting the buttons, and there's these walls falling in the distance. And I said, "Jack, what's this?" And again, casually, like he took the picture and he was there. "That's the Battle of Jericho." I'm like, "They had that freaking cosmic organ." So, like, I tell you, to this day, the most significant experience was those, 8 hours. And Ross was so kind and so gentle. She led me to a room with drawers and drawers and drawers of unpublished art. And I saw a sequence of pages. And I was just so excited. Image Comics was very successful at the time. Our brand was very strong. And we loved Jack. And I said, "Ross, what if I took these pages and had all my partners and I ink these pages? What if we then published this and gave you the proceeds?" And she would check with Jack, and Jack gave it the green light. And I called my buddies. I said, "Jim Lee, would you ink Jack Kirby?" "Done." "Todd McFarlane, would you ink Jack Kirby?" "Done." Jerry Orderly, "Would you ink Jack Kirby?" "Done." Mark Silvestri, everybody. And I'll tell you, I think they all were like, I mailed them the original pages. And Todd McFarlane called me and said, Bud, is this an original Kirby?" And I said, "Yeah." "And I get to ink it?" And I said, that's what we talked about. It's not a Xerox, Todd. This is the shit. So that was just a tremendous experience. Like I said, we love Jack, and I can never repay him for all the great memories he's given us. And I know everyone else here has a story to tell. But I'll tell you, I always think on Facebook and Twitter, and talking to my peers and fans, and we always talk about the Mount Rushmore comics. Who's on it? And I'm like, Jack's not on the Mount Rushmore comics. He gets his own mountain. Okay? And here's the deal. We have to keep talking about him all the time. Because Jack passed before all of his creations came to screen, if we don't talk about him, we can't count on the corporations to do that. And I'm so thrilled about the settlement. Like all of you, I stood up on my couch when I came up on the internet, and I cheered because the Kirbys finally got what was coming to them. But the bottom line is, if you don't talk about him, people don't know who he is, because we live in such a rapid fire, in information. I have 3 kids, 15, 13, and 11, and they consume at such a rapid rate, and literally it's in and out, in and out. I'm like, "I thought you were into that." "Oh, that was last week. I'm into this now." What? So things like this are great, and I'll talk about Jack Kirby for the rest of my life, because he was the single most important comic book creator, and I think he's like, people talk about Steven Spielberg, and I think Jack Kirby should be talked about in the same sentence, and so let's keep talking about it.
Detail out of that story, and I'm going to put it in because these 2 bodies probably put it in. There was a period there of about 10 years, the last 10 years of Jack's life, when he was getting an awful lot of tributes. And you may have seen comics where people put him in as a character, or they name characters after him, and things like that. And Jack, and I'm about to say, I don't want anybody to think, Jack was not flattered by every one of them. But Roz, to some extent, and a little bit with Jack, they were always kind of conscious of the fact that some of these things were real easy to do. I personally, this is speaking for me now, I have a little problem with people who inflate minor efforts into major things. This is a bad analogy, but after 9/11, I knew people who thought they had struck a blow against the Taliban because they put a flag on their cars. And I thought, no, the people who went out and gave blood, who donated money to the victims, Herb Trimpe, who worked at Ground Zero for 6 months, volunteer work, counseling people. Those people made putting a flag on your car was like the dictionary definition of the least you could do. There is no smaller gesture that cost. It was $2.98 for the flags. I mean, if you could have found a $1.98 flag, maybe that would have been less of a gesture. But there were a lot of people who paid tribute to Jack, and their intentions were always good, and we respect them. But there were a few people who did outstanding things to help the Kirbys. Roz used to occasionally refer to, and this was kind of a joke with a little meaning under it. Somebody would say, "Oh, I just made a character look like you in my comic, Jack." And Roz would mutter under her breath, "Oh, good, another tribute with no money attached to it." And the Image guys, and Rob and those guys, they gave Jack for that comic a very, very large check, which is something very few people who pay tribute to Jack ever did. And to a guy who grew up in the Depression, and to a guy who was financially wrong for much of his life, I think that meant more to Jack than being made a character in 100 other comics. And thank you, Rob, for sponsoring. And of course, I have to apologize to Rob because, as I mentioned earlier, people sometimes say the wrong thing. In the program book, I credited him as the creator of Spawn.
And I laugh. That's funny.
So, I'm sure I'm not the first person to make that mistake. Anyway, thank you, Rob. You can leave whenever you have to go. But stay as long as you can, please.
Okay.
Please. Thank you.
Thank you.
David, tell us about your first encounter. First of all, David, if you don't know, David has a company called Vanguard Publishing. They publish some of the best comic book artists who ever. Give them a list of names of people you publish.
Jim Steranko, Carmine Infantino, Frank Frazetta, Wally Wood, John Romita Sr., John Buscema, Roy Crakel, Al Williamson, Jeffrey Jones, Mike Kaluna. That's the neighborhood.
Anybody good? Okay. Tell us about your meeting with Jack. How Jack came into your life.
I met Jack in the mid to late 70s at a convention, and it wasn't that big of a convention, so we got a lot of time together. I was a guest at the convention. I was very young, but I was a guest already, and I don't know how to put this. Maybe I'm just going to say it wrong. As a joke, the promoter who I grew up with, he's now passed away, Larry Langford, we kind of grew up together. But anyway, kind of as a joke, he made me party guest of honor. So, amongst other things, I was supposed to keep everyone entertained. And so we spent a lot of time in the guest suite. Frank Kelly Freeze was there. We started a very close friendship at that time. And the same with Jack. We spent a lot of time together at that convention. And then after that, the Dallas convention started to grow, and Jack and Ross started coming back practically every year. For a while, there was so many signed Kirby comics in the Dallas area, you could find them easily in 25-cent boxes. So every time they come, we spend time and we stay in touch, and I write letters and occasionally talk on the phone. And kind of what's already been talked about, one thing that's very important about Jack is, Evanier said, talked about how he was an extremely honest person. He might make a mistake, a historical mistake in just relating something, but there was nothing ever kind of like there was never any kind of manipulation. There's so much of this rampant today. That's why I want to say it. By saying it almost acts like there's something there. The point is there wasn't. He was just straight up guy, and there was even his persona, his physical persona, kind of related to his artwork. I grew up reading his comics, which he didn't just draw; he wrote those comics. Stan may have, the dialogue done. If I'm that I could drop some bombshells here today. So, you know, sometimes I get one. But I'm going to say, you know, he was like the living embodiment of his work. There's a strength to his work, there's dynamics. I mean, in a way, he kind of moved around, kind of stepped his neck would be kind of like this. And I think Rob did a great imitation. And the only thing is his neck has to be a little tighter. But there was this strength in there. You could see the Thing or the Hulk or, you know, even Mr. Fantastic. All of his characters somehow was embodied in Jack himself. And but he was just like a very solid, straight up kind of guy. And one thing I like to refer to him to is a fountainhead. There was an old skit on Saturday Night Live about Woody Guthrie being in the hospital before he died, and Bob Dylan was coming in, a very young Bob Dylan was coming in to visit him. And everything that came out of Woody Guthrie's mouth ended up becoming lyrics to Bob Dylan songs. Bob Dylan sitting there taking notes of everything that Guthrie uttered from his deathbed. Well, Jack was likewise a creative genius. You know, I wish I had a tape recording of every conversation we ever had, because he could barely open his mouth without ideas coming out. In some ways, I'm almost surprised how a lot of his themes, you could go back and see a theme in the Golden Age. He revives it again in the 60s. He does another take on it in the 70s or even the 80s. You know, whether it's the Kid Games. I look at the Forever People, and I see the Newsboy Legion. You know, or you know, Thor. You know, how early was the first appearance of Thor? 1942 or something like that. You know, and then he's got Thor over at Marvel, and the New Gods really is an extension of Asgard in a way. It's like this is the new thing. So I'm actually kind of surprised with all those revisiting of ideas. Other people did that too. Wally Wood's a perfect example, but Kirby could come up with ideas so easily. And so, you know, there's information coming out today. It's easier to look back in hindsight and kind of figure out what was going on. But he was a great guy, and I was very proud to know him, and I was happy to stay in touch with him until pretty much the day he died. I do all these books, I've worked with these artists. I basically created a career for myself working with people that I grew up admiring. You know, I wasn't just inspired to draw because they inspired me with their art. I also wanted to know them as people and work with them. And I've worked with all these great names. There were a couple things Jack and I talked about working on. I was talking about when I was first getting into publishing in about 1990. I talked to him about maybe working on the Thunder Agents. I had to deal with John Carpenter to do Thunder Agents. But anyway, I haven't done a lot of Kirby. The biggest probably Kirby-related project I've done was I did Joe Simon's book, Comic Book Makers. And Joe was very proud of that. And one of the big reasons I wanted to do that was because of the connection, the Kirby connection. But I just want to say this for the record. And everything's subjective. And I could debate on this for weeks, months, however long. And there's a lot of artists that I'm very invested into. Wally Wood, James Franco, Carmine Infantino writes, Frank Frazetta, those all rise to the top of the list. But for the record, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest comic book creator, not just artist, the greatest comic book creator of all time is Jack Kirby. Amen. With Kirby is because Mark and the Kirby Collector does such a fine job. It's like, you know, Kirby's being taken care of.
Well, you know, David takes good care of a lot of these people, posthumously in most cases, unfortunately.
No, they're dying now. They're dying on me. I got to find a new generation.
Anybody?
We lost Joe Boyd. Within a year, Joe Kubert and Carmine Infantino, Al Plastino, now Irvin Hazen. You know, it's like when I was a kid, the new guys were Neil Adams and Jim Stracco, and now they're suddenly they're old guys.
There was a convention, WonderCon, 2 years ago, I think, I went up to Marv and Len, and we ran into, remember this in the dealer's room? I walked up to Marv and Len, and I said, you want to hear something frightening, guys? And they said, okay, what is it? I said, there's 65,000 people at this convention. The people who've been in comics the longest here are you, 3 of us. Len, Marv, and me. And I still think I got in last Tuesday, so it's amazing. Dave, we could talk about all the different people you represented and published. I want to talk about Wally Wood for a couple of minutes here, because Jack and Wally had an intermittently very close relationship. For years they didn't see each other. The 2 times I ever spent any time with Wally Wood, he would really knock it off the subject of how wonderful Jack Kirby was, both personally and professionally. He kept talking about how well Jack had treated him on Sky Masters, and how guilty he felt about when he had missed deadlines, or and that was not a great time in Mr. Wood's life, and he was having some problems with what they call substance abuse, and he was late with tapes. Jack had to keep tracking him down, or sometimes suddenly he gained something for him. And Jack had nothing but fondness for Wally Wood. There was a scene at the last San Diego convention that Wood came to, I'm forgetting the year, maybe 80 or 81. Yeah, 80 or 81. And I was talking with Mr. Wood in a bar area. He was nursing 1 drink the entire time. I am not comfortable around people who drink. I do not drink, and I'm not comfortable really around them a lot, at times for the reasons that are relevant to this panel. And he's going on about how he had not seen Jack at the convention to that moment. And finally, we looked down, and Jack and Roz are walking up to go to a party, which we were going to get, had to pass us to get to the party. And I said, there he is. And Wood jumps up. At that time, he was not the most physically able person, but he suddenly had a spring in his body. He jumps up and he goes, Jack, you're the greatest. And Jack goes, no, Wally, you're the greatest. And Wood says, no, you're the greatest. You're the greatest artist who ever lived in comics. And Jack says, no, Wood, you're the greatest artist who ever lived in comics. And I thought, this is not a debate we need to get into. Either one of them, you can make the case. And Wood, in your research about this man, have you found similar examples of how the fondness the 2 guys had for each other? I don't think there was either one ever said a bad word about the other. They admired each other tremendously. One thing that Wood said to me the first time I met him was that he had seen, looking at Joe Sinai from Fantastic Four, and he said, that's the way Jack should be inked. I inked too much of Jack. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was like I took away some of the stuff Jack did better than me, particularly in the faces and the body postures and things like that. And he wanted very much to ink Jack again, but to do it more like he did, like Sinai had taught him a different approach to inking Jack's pencils. Do you have any thoughts on this type of thing?
I could write about half a dozen books about Jack Kirby and Wally Wood.
Okay, well, can you talk a little bit about it here for a couple minutes?
Well, first of all, I don't think they spent that much time together, because artists in those days, it's a very unfortunate thing. They work they had a secluded work. You know, they're working at home. And now Wood, on occasion, employed various assistants. A lot of people got to the point where they thought he had assistants all the time. No, he didn't. He had, he worked at EC for 15 years. People think about him hopping around all the time. And later, he did hop around a lot. But he was at EC for 15 years, including he was in the only artist in every single issue of Mad for the first 10 years. But I don't think they got to spend much time together, but they had the absolute utmost respect for each other. I know Wood didn't just consider Jack a great talent, he considered him a genius, and I consider Jack a genius. But Jack's work was very foreign to every other style. Wood's working in kind of a little more classical style. He had his own little tropes and techniques, but he was influenced by Eisner, he was influenced by Raymond, he was influenced by Foster. Kirby, I talked to Kirby, I asked him, who were your influences? He said Foster and Raymond, and Ed Cartier, who used to illustrate the Shadow Pulps. Well, but when you see it through Kirby, you can't see those influences. Jack saw them. You know, you may have seen more romance in this romance work. You may have seen a little bit of the Raymond, and in the character of the demon, you get some Foster. But you know, it's like Jack's a prism. The light comes through, and it comes out multicolored Kirby everywhere. Yep. So when inkers inked Jack, they really didn't know what to do with it. You know, the squiggles. It took years for people to figure out what to do with that. So I understand where Wood was coming from on that. But it's a sad thing, and now I'm going to get into one of these little political areas. I like to put the group together as Kirby did go in Wood. Okay, that's a triumvirate. Kirby did go in Wood, and that was a magical, powerful triumvirate at Marvel, specifically in the year '65. Wood came to Marvel in '64. He left mad. He was selling 2 million copies a month. He came over to Marvel. He took over Daredevil. He was there for exactly 1 year. Greatly celebrated by Stan on his arrival, unlike any artist ever had been at that time. But all three of those guys, they were plotting their stories. And Stan was dialoguing them. They liked the freedom to work the way they were working there, but there were some issues that arose, and they were all interested in leaving at the same time. Kirby left first. Ditko left within a couple of months. Wood left first. Wood left first. Ditko followed him in a couple of months. They both went over to Tower. Jack had a big family. Those guys, neither one of them had kids. Jack had a lot more responsibility. And so he couldn't go back to DC at that time because of the lawsuit with Jack Schiff. And so if he could have, I think he would have left right there and then at the same time if he could have gone to DC. But he wasn't going to go to Tower or a smaller company that he didn't feel he had the security he needed for his family until Harmon made it possible some years later. So I got on to one of my pet things. I forgot what your question was.
So did I.
But they had the utmost respect, absolutely. And I'm glad to hear your quote of Jack on, even if he was being playful.
Well, they were being playful, but there was obviously the respect for the two guys, for each other. Because there were two guys who were completely non-competitive. And neither one ever took a job away from the other. And because they did, they kind of had this, I love people who do stuff really, really well and don't flaunt it. They're just good. And Jack was just good. He was not afraid. If you went up to Jack and said, Mr. Kirby, you're my second favorite artist after Gil Kane. And I heard someone say this one time. It didn't bother Jack the slightest bit. Fine, Gil's terrific. His sense of ego did not require tearing down anybody else's. And he was very confident in himself. Now, one of the other aspects of the relationship between Mr. Wood and Mr. Kirby was that throughout the 60s, after Wood left Marvel, quite unhappily, he stayed in contact with Jack. He would phone him every month or two. And one of the main people who was telling Jack, you're getting screwed there, was Wood. And later on, he wrote a couple of essays, which he made this quite clear. It was a great, very great track. And every 2 or 3 months, Wood would call Jack, tell him what he was doing, and Jack encouraged Wood he encouraged him to do Wit's End. He encouraged him to be, that Patrick and I talked about being earlier, being entrepreneurial, and wished he could do that himself, but his lifestyle did not allow for that. Nor did he really have the business acumen for that. So
this is the 50th anniversary of Wood's biggest superhero year. 50 years ago this year, Wally Wood created the Red Daredevil costume, and also the cane cable that allowed him to swing through the city. Before that, the only way Daredevil could travel was swinging from a flagpole. Every time he jumped out a window, he hoped and prayed there was a flagpole. and it was amazing how many times there was.
Well, when you're blind, you do things like that.
And in '65, he did that, and then he went to Tower and created the Thunder Agents. He actually started creating the Thunder Agents in Marvel and considered placing them there and chose not to and placed them over at Tower.
All right, I'm going to come back to this thing with David if we have time, but I want to talk to Mark a bit here. Mark, now you've been on this panel before, and you've talked about how you and Len used to go over and sit at the feet of Jack and such. Talk a little about later when you were editor-in-chief at Marvel, and all of a sudden somebody comes into you one day and says, you know, Jack's here.
Yeah, there was Stan, and he comes back, and it's still very quiet, it's still fairly secret that Jack was coming back to Marvel, which was the most amazing thing in the world. I was a huge Jack Kirby fan from the point. I didn't even know who the artist was, but I read everything, and in the back of Adventure Comics there was the Green Arrow strip, which was one of the more boring strips ever done. And suddenly there was a whole bunch of Green Arrow stories with giant arrows coming from outer space and all of this stuff, and I'm like, hey, this is really good stuff. Years later, I discovered it was Jack Kirby, you know. Or I'm reading the comics and I buy Challenge of the Unknown. And again, no credits, and it's by Jack and Wally. And it's, wow, where did this come from? This is like no other comic. So I've been a fan of his forever, and we went to his house very often when I was like 13, 14, and 15. An endless fountain of information. The kindest human beings you will have ever met. Two little kids come there. First thing is, Roz insists upon making sandwiches. So we would have eaten before we go down to see Jack. So we ate. We had a nice time. We go down again. Imagine the person who's drawing Galactus at the time. We saw pages with Galactus months before they came out. Speaking to little kids and treating us like adults. You know, it was amazing. So I've been a fan, and I got to work with Jack on covers, and got to work with, you know, the only one I suggested was one Captain America cover. You don't tell Jack what to do, but it was the big anniversary, 1776, 1976, 200th anniversary, and I said, we have to do a special cover, and he just did the most amazing, amazing stuff. And I think he enjoyed working with me because he knew me. And that was a little bit of a difference, but I only worked with him a brief time before everything sort of was moved over to other editors and stuff like that.
Now, you remember you telling me how much you loved the first Eternals when it came in?
Well, the New Gods, that was at DC.
No, but I'm talking about Marvel.
Yeah, well, the Eternals, Jack, first of all, I'm a mythology nut, and Jack created so much by Jack because of his Tales of Asgard stuff, which was the most amazing comics I've ever seen. And I love the mythology he created. And I was a huge fan of the New Gods artwork and all that, which, by the way, he had in his house about 8 years before it ever appeared, because they were on the walls of his house, and all those characters, and he would tell us what the stories were about, and we just kept waiting and waiting and waiting to see when they'd come out. The Eternals was yet another take. We were talking about revisiting concepts, but taking it in a brand new direction yet again. It's the most amazing stuff. Unfortunately, I was a huge fan of his stuff. Stan was an even larger fan. He really was. He loved Jack's work. But not all the editors did. Not all the other people, because his writing wasn't the same flavor as the rest of the Marvel stuff. And I think there were a lot of people who may not have appreciated the work he was doing as well. But you look at it and go, nobody has this imagination. Nobody draws to this scale. But the giant characters, and then the little ones, and the endless backgrounds, and the most amazing stuff ever. But am I hitting anything you wanted to
Yes.
yes.
I remember that discussion you and I had about when the first Eternals
I'm trying to remember it myself.
First day, you were so amazed at that. Marv said something interesting to me one time. We were talking about the decision at DC to cancel the New Gods and Forever People, and he said,
please tell me.
You said one of the things that worked against Jack was he was the only guy in the entire industry. You could say to him, I'm canceling 2 of your books, come up with 2 more tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he replaced them with 2 books that were worthy of publication.
Yeah, Commanding was one of my favorite. I think Commanding is one of the most brilliant kids books ever done. And I'm watching it and going, this is a perfect kids book. I got a chance to use the Commander Universe and the Convergence books a couple of months ago, and I was thrilled that they let me do it, because the giant ideas. I had a chance to revisit and reread all those issues, and it's a great kids book, and I think people were looking for him to do the next New Gods for adults and all this, and he did this great kids thing that's the most imaginative type of book that kids should be looking at because it can spark their imagination. And unbelievable. And frankly, then going on to the demon as well. Yet another genre. Jack Kirby.
Commandy was so strong. Commandy was so strong that after Jack returned to Marvel, it continued on.
Yep.
There was a long run with Ayers on it and Joe Kubert doing covers.
But nobody had the imagination of those stories and the ability to do, because Jack was willing to do totally absurd concepts, but it would work in the universe he'd create. And nobody else could bring themselves sometimes to do these things, which robs you of imagination. Jack would just go for it, and he'd go for these absolutely bizarro ideas and somehow make them work. And we would, most of us, fairly accomplished in different fields, would go, we can't do that. How do you make that work? How do you do it without getting people to laugh? And Jack wanted you to laugh at certain sequences, and you did. It was amazing.
Yeah. Let me ask you, here's a left field question, Marv. What's your single favorite, if you had to explain Jack Kirby to somebody with one comic, what would you have?
Oh, wow. Thor. And the reason for Thor was, it was on a scale we had never seen before in comics. It was huge. Any of the Galactus material, the first run also, but Jack's sense of scope. He did phenomenal things in the Fantastic Four. He did phenomenal things in all of Captain America and all that. But Thor seemed to be, he loved mythology, as you know. He had pictures of gods and everything all over the house, and he loved all of that stuff. And Thor gave him the first chance, I think, to do in comics the stuff he loved himself. And you look at the Tales of Asgard material, the 4-panel pages, when he still could have done 9 panels or something, and I think that one would be it. But then you look at Fighting American. Brilliant concept after having done Captain America and now doing the parody almost of it. There was nothing he didn't do. I have to say, in my office, there's only 2 pieces of artwork that aren't about what I've done. So all the artwork in my office is about stuff I've worked on, by other artists and stuff. But there's a Jack Kirby Thor that he drew for me back in the early 60s, because I thought Thor's costume was brilliant and everything. And it's a beautiful, large picture of Thor like this. And there's one other picture, and that's it. The only 2 things. And
What's the other picture?
It's actually a Sunday Little Abner from 1938. I'm a huge Little Abner fan. And it was 1938, Little Abner, where a mad scientist is turning Little Abner into Superman. And it was August of 1938. And I had to have that one up there.
We only have like a couple more minutes here. Rob, David, what would you show? The one thing you handed Jack Kirby. Rob, what would, if you one comic you Jack you handed him to explain Kirby to him, get the book? Dave, I'm going to ask you the same thing. So you think.
Honestly, I would give them the Galactus Saga, and I'll tell you why. Jim Valentino, a good friend of mine, he in 1988-89, I had a studio with Jim Valentino. He did Shadowhawk, he did Normal Man, very accomplished cartoonist. We shared a studio, and the 2 things he did. So in 1989, I'm 21, and he came in and he goes, "The music you listen to is crap. Here's all these Beatles albums. You have 1 week to listen."